What's up, everyone? I have a lengthy one today. Today we'll be talking about primary employment history and self-employment history guidelines. We're not going to talk about how to calculate this income today, and we're not talking about different types of income such as commission, overtime, and bonus. We're just talking about base employment history. We'll be looking into conventional, both Fannie and Freddie, FHA, VA, and USDA. Fannie Mae is pretty simple. Fannie wants you to have 2 years of employment, but there is some leeway that Fannie Mae will consider employment stable for a shorter period of time, as long as there is positive factors to offset this income. Anything variable, you cannot have less than 1 year of employment. If you are self-employed and you have less than 2 years, but more than 1 year, it can be considered effective income. But the type of business you are running, you must have experience working in the field, and the income is reasonable for previous trends. For the topic that we are discussing this week, Freddies and Fannies are one and the same, just worded differently. So I'm not going to sound like a broken record and repeat myself. Now, FHA is very different. 2 years of employment history is required. FHA is very strict on this. Also, if there's a gap of employment for more than 6 months, you must verify previous employment of 2 years prior to your gap, even if you have to go all the way back to 1990 to verify previous employment. I actually had to do that once on one of my files. And they must be back at their current job for at least 6 months. FHA does allow education to be considered employment as long as it makes sense for the borrower's file. If the borrower just graduated from nursing school and is now a nurse, it makes sense. But if a borrower graduated from business school and is now a nurse, it doesn't make sense at all. Does that make sense? FHA requires 2 years on self-employment, but if you have a borrower with less than 2 years but greater than 1 year, and if the borrower's previous employment is in the same line of work with at least a 2 year history, then we can make a case for using 1 year for the self-employed income. Let's jump into VA. Now, VA gets very fun because it has a lot of gray for the underwriter to make a decision. And it's up to the underwriter. But a minimum of 2 year work history is required. I know what I just said sounds a little contradicting, but let's get into it. Now, what do we do if we have less than a 2 year employment history for VA? If we have less than a 2 year employment history, we have to make our case to be able to give the borrower stable monthly income. Generally, anything less than 12 months is not considered stable, but again, VA is very, very gray and puts the responsibility on the lender. A lot of lenders use the FHA rule for VA loans. For VA, if you have a borrower that has a lot of changes in employment, the lender must take necessary steps to justify on why giving the borrower the income. VA is very gray, and this gives your VA underwriter more room to make a decision that fits for your file. Every file is different, especially for VA. VA cares about the vet. Now let's look into self-employment for VA. 2 year employment history is required. Less is allowed, but not recommended. The only time less than a 2 year is allowed and considered stable is when the borrower had previous experience in the field. Less than 1 year is never used, and I have never seen it get approved. But again, as you can see, VA puts it on the underwriter to determine the stability of income. Now let's talk about the last agency. It's actually one of my favorites to underwrite, which is USDA. Self-employment's pretty easy. It's 2 years or it's a no-go. Now, for W-2 wage income, you must have 2 years of employment history, unless there's a positive factor that renders not having a 2-year employment history. At no instance can you have less than a 12-month history of employment. A very good example of this is if you have a person that just graduated college and has been employed for 7 months at their current profession of study. We must wait until they have 1 year of employment history, and your positive factor for not having 2 year employment history is their education. But you must have a 1 year employment history, even if they graduated college within the last 6 months and they just started working in their field. As always, thank you so much for tuning in this week. I know this one was a bit longer than the normal ones, but if you guys like content like this, please make sure you guys subscribe and follow us. And see you guys next week.